For over a century, medical textbooks have told the exact same story about a man named Phineas Gage. He is presented as the ultimate cautionary tale of brain trauma, a vulgar, impulsive, broken man wandering aimlessly through life. But in 2009, this photograph surfaced. This is Gage after his injury. Notice the confident posture, the tailored clothes, and the inscribed iron bar. He's holding it like a badge of honor. He doesn't look like a disheveled misfit. He looks remarkably put together. To understand why this image is so surprising, we have to look at how doctors understood the brain in 1848. At the time, neurologists believed the cerebral cortex was either a useless protective shell or a single lump of tissue where no specific part did any specific job. Gage's survival provided the first physical evidence that the brain is not a single unit, but a collection of specialized parts. In September 1848, Gage was a 25-year-old construction foreman working on the Rutland and Burlington Railroad in Cavendish, Vermont. By all accounts, he was highly efficient, capable, and well-respected by his crew. Part of his job involved packing explosive powder into rock crevices using a custom-made iron tamping rod. But on the afternoon of September 13th, the rod scraped against the rock. The friction created a spark, igniting the powder. The resulting blast rocketed the 13.5-pound iron rod straight upward. This diagram traces the exact path of the rod. It entered just under Gage's left cheek, passed behind his left eye, sliced cleanly through the left frontal lobe of his brain, and burst out the top of his skull. It landed point first 80 feet away, smeared with blood and brain matter. Given the severity of the physical trauma, Gage should have died instantly. Instead, he was thrown to his back, convulsed briefly, and within minutes he was speaking and walking. 30 minutes later, he was sitting upright in a chair, casually explaining to a local doctor what had just happened. Surviving the physical wound was astonishing enough, but as the physical bleeding stopped, the real medical mystery began. The man who survived the blast was no longer the man who had packed the powder. Gage's physical recovery took months. Under the care of Dr. John Martin Harlow, he survived severe hemorrhaging, periods of delirium, and a massive fungal infection that required emergency drainage. Eventually, the wounds closed. But his employers, who had previously praised his work, flatly refused to rehire him. The once respectful foreman was now wildly impulsive, highly profane, and completely unable to stick to a plan. His friends famously concluded that he was simply no longer Gage. This highlighted area is the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. It is the region of the brain responsible for executive functions, things like impulse control, social cognition, and long-term planning. As the animation shows, when the rod severed this tissue, those specific regulatory nodes went dark. Without that physical tissue to regulate his behavior, the delicate equilibrium between his intellect and his animal passions was dismantled. He retained his memory, his language skills, and his motor functions, but lost the social filters that made him who he was. His drastically altered behavior provided visceral evidence that personality is not an ethereal, spiritual concept. It is anchored in physical structure, and if you break the structure, you break the personality. Because this idea challenged everything doctors thought they knew, the medical establishment of the 1800s split into opposing factions, with different groups using Gage's survival to argue completely different theories. This is Dr. Henry J. Bigelow, a prominent Harvard surgeon who examined Gage in 1849. Bigelow used the case to defend the theory of brain equipotentiality, the idea that the brain acts as a single, undivided unit. He published reports claiming Gage was physically and mentally recovered, dismissing the behavioral changes described by others. Dr. Harlow, however, painted a much darker picture. Years later, he published detailed accounts of Gage's severe behavioral deterioration, directly contradicting Bigelow's assessment. This montage of Gage's exhumed skull let scientists like David Ferrier prove cerebral localization. Looking at the top right panel, we see why he survived. The rod's path hit only the frontal lobe, leaving the lower, vital structures controlling heartbeat completely untouched. Memory and motor control survived because those centers were spared, but his impulse control vanished because its physical location was destroyed. Gage's tragedy forced the scientific community to accept that our highest cognitive functions and social behaviors have a specific physical address. For decades, the story of Phineas Gage stopped there. The persistent medical myth insists that he lived out the rest of his short life as a ruined, impulsive misfit, wandering as a sideshow attraction. Historical records uncovered recently reveal a different reality. Gage's severe impulsive phase did not last forever. It was actually temporary. After a few difficult years, his behavior slowly began to stabilize. By 1852, Gage had traveled to Valparaiso, Chile. This is a historical view of the city's bustling harbor. In this complex, unfamiliar environment, he secured an intensely demanding job. He spent 7 years working as a long-haul stagecoach driver. This role required him to care for 6 horses, navigate treacherous mountain routes, and manage passengers and cargo. It demanded constant focus and highly organized route planning. Gage was successfully performing a job that relied on the very cognitive controls his injury had supposedly destroyed. To explain this return to functionality, modern medicine looks to the social recovery hypothesis. The rigid, daily structure of caring for animals and executing a precise stagecoach route provided an external framework for his behavior. That highly structured environment effectively allowed his brain to begin healing itself. This is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize by forming new connections. Surviving tissue branches out to compensate for the dark, damaged central zone. As new pathways bypass the dead tissue, they restore the flow of information, effectively rewiring Gage's mind. Phineas Gage is often remembered for how easily an injury can strip away a person's identity, but his final years prove that the brain can adapt and reorganize itself, even after massive trauma.